Everyone, welcome back after an eventful legislative season, and we're looking forward to a political season. Mary Ellen, we're going to start with you. I asked each one of you to become editorial headline writers for the recently passed regular session and special session. You have the first shot at it.
Well, if I were to do a headline, I would say distrust and disarray, the legislature ends its session.
Okay. All right, Steve?
My headline is Not So Lame a Duck, referring to Governor Rick Scott, who people had written off before the session started, but he comes back with a vengeance, pulling out the sledgehammer version of his veto pen and really got the legislature's attention.
Okay. Jim?
I'd say Gardner goes for broke. Andy Gardner, the Senate president, took healthcare expansion and just ran with it as far as he possibly could. In the end, it blew up, but that's what was at the heart of us being here for that long.
Okay. And John?
I'd say Republican legislature waits till the midnight hour because we had a lot of budget deal making way late. And then also the mere fact that they were in a special session in June for the first time in 23 years with a budget deadline of July 1st staring them in the face.
Those headlines covered a gamut of players and issues. That was great. I think you all ought to have those jobs wherever you work. Those are wonderful. Steve, everybody knows there was a huge breakdown and the House took its toys and walked away before the official sine die time. What factors led to this kind of historic breakdown?
Well, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary next year of the Republicans being in complete control of the Florida legislature. And this is the most serious breach we've seen in philosophy between Republicans. You've got senators from larger districts who are more moderate, who are open to the idea of using federal Obamacare money to expand health insurance to people who don't have it. And you've got House members who are ideologically generally more conservative and come from very small districts and who are, any mention of the word Obamacare makes their skin crawl. And it's a fundamental difference in the role of the federal government in our lives.
Mary Ellen, you feel the same kind of way?
Yeah, I think what Steve described it is exactly right. And what I think is a fascinating thing to watch right now is I get a sense that the tectonic plates that are the fundamental bearing of the Republican Party are starting to shift. And what we saw was just a little bit of the tension that is mounting. And when fundamental dynamics like the moderate Senate and the ideological House hit this kind of pressure point, things are going to erupt. And that's what I predict will continue to happen in the next year as we move forward to this next legislative session. My headline was Distrust and Disarray. I have not watched this kind of distrust among Republicans. We have, Republicans basically working up campaigns against other Republicans. It's going to have a ripple effect. It's going to have a ripple effect on the tension between the governor, but it's also within the Republican Party. And I think it's going to be just a fascinating drama to watch unfold.
Jim, as I recall, when the House decided to stop its deliberations early and walk away, that came as a surprise to me, and I think it came as a surprise to others. There were maybe some inklings of it. But was it a surprise to most of the media and the press corps that they just walked away and kind of provoked a very hostile response?
It was a surprise. For those of us who were sitting in the Senate while that all was going on, they were debating a fracking bill. And all of a sudden, there's this scurrying around on the Senate floor, and the House had gone home, or had essentially gone home. So it was a big surprise. I mean, going back to what Mary Ellen was referring to, this became personal, and especially became personal when the House walked away. But even before that, probably the most visible example was the House Appropriations Chairman, Richard Corcoran, who's the next House Speaker, got up on the floor one day in the middle of session, was talking about, essentially declaring war. I mean, so it became a personal thing. And by them going home 3 days early, it even heightened those tensions even more. I think the Senate was caught off guard, and they were really unhappy about it.
The residue of that, John, personal, the word personal, it's just not political, it's not just policy, it's personal. Does this have a life to it? I mean, are we going to see this personal dimension after a cooling off period of I hate to say cooling off period of this summer, but when they come back, is it still going to be there?
Oh, I think so. The two leaders of the House and Senate, that's House Speaker Steve Crisafulli and Senate President Andy Gardner, they have another year. So they will still be in command, and their teams in place will also be the same, and there's going to be that same tension between the two sides. Now, the issues may change a little bit, though the Senate seems to be indicating that they will make another swipe at trying to do some kind of expansion of health care for the uninsured, though that is a non-starter in the House. But you compound that with, I think a lot of senators felt very betrayed by the governor and his heavy hand on vetoes, which recently occurred. And you put all that together, and there's a lot of bad blood right now at the state capitol.
Let's talk about those vetoes a minute, Jim. $461 million worth of vetoes, page after page of individual projects from all across the state. A lot of people said that some of those vetoes were kind of vindictive on the governor's part, targeted at some senators more than House members. What's your reading of all that, and going forward, what kind of impact will those vetoes have on the political process?
Well, the Senate leadership clearly, and senators clearly think they were vindictive. You know, that the Senate basically battled with Scott in the House for 3 or 4 months, and they think they were vindictive. Maybe example A is that Andy Gardner, the Senate president, put $15 million in the budget for a University of Central Florida campus in downtown Orlando, and the governor nixed it. So, you know, stuff like that in the past, a lot of times presiding officers have gotten those approved because they are presiding officers and of the same party. I do think, though, that something that's kind of lost in here is the legislature kind of asked for a lot of vetoes. I mean, they stuck a lot of projects into the budget at the last minute, just teed it up for the governor. So if you're a conservative Republican governor and you're out there talking about protecting tax dollars and everything, I mean, you don't even need an excuse to veto some of that stuff. So, you know, they clearly feel some of it was vindictive, but I personally, I sort of think that they, again, teed it up for him to allow him to do it.
I want to get everybody's take on this because this is pretty fundamental to what's going to be happening. John, I'll start with you. With all of this in play in the environment, the 2016 session begins in January this year, not in March. It's an election year, and it was decided to move the starting date forward, and that means the committee meetings in the fall, September forward, will be very intense and very meaningful. Let's look at going forward, kind of coming out of all of this. We just got really a few weeks before it all starts again. Maybe it never stops. Give me a preview, and all of you, of what we expect when the legislature gets back.
Well, at this point, we do expect some friction between the House and Senate, that's going to endure. And how that is played out is a little bit of an unknown right now. There's also going to be, I think, an effort by the Senate to exact some revenge on the governor for what Jim was talking about a moment ago, the feeling that they were wounded deeply by the round of vetoes, unfairly in their view. And I think there's already some talk about them trying to rein in the governor on policy matters. His approach to economic development seems to be something that's under scrutiny with the Senate, and they would like to exact some answers out of the governor's office and possibly take away some of his power. Now, all that's sort of the kind of talk that you get right after you've had a project vetoed. But nonetheless, I think that kind of animosity is going to linger. How it translates into bills and policy before the committees when they start reconvening next year or in the fall, it's kind of hard to tell. but there's going to be I think a backdrop of distrust.
Steve, how about you? What are you seeing arising for or being teed up for the fall and the session?
I think it's going to be miserable for some people still. Keep in mind, the odd-numbered year session is supposed to be the least political part of the 2-year cycle. Next year is an election year. People are going to be digging in even deeper in their positions on these issues. It also needs to be pointed out that Rick Scott has some unfinished business and some damage to overcome, particularly and only really with the Florida Senate. Many of his agency heads were not confirmed last session. If they're not confirmed next session, they all lose their jobs. I don't think the Senate would go to that extreme measure, but I suppose it's not beyond the realm of possibility. The other thing that we're seeing that I think is important is the staff that surrounds Governor Rick Scott they're young, they're not experienced in the ways of Tallahassee, and you can see this in the way things play out. There's no underlying sort of personal relationships that used to exist, which is, I'm going to veto your stuff, but we can also go out and have a drink. It's gotten more personal, and it has a little bit more because of Rick Scott, it's got a little bit more of a corporate feel to it, the way these decisions are happening.
And Mary Ellen, one more minute in this segment.
The level of distrust has seeped into the relationship the legislators have, especially in the Senate, with the governor. It's so bad that Jack Latfella, who worked very hard to help elect Rick Scott, after the vetoes, he started collecting examples of jobs that were lost because of the veto. So he is basically putting together a campaign to push back at the governor and say, Governor, this was not a jobs budget, this was a jobs lost budget. That's the kind of animosity you'd normally expect to see from someone of the opposite party, not somebody that helped elect this governor. And I think that is a sign of how deep the tensions are going to be here.
Thank you, panel. We'll come back and talk about the 2016 elections in Florida.